Okay, so welcome everyone. And uh, if you if you don't know, this webinar is part of the series of 5 workshop for the research mentoring scheme that um, Learning Design Special Interest Group leads. And it is part of the bigger learning design, community mentoring. Yeah. So I'll start with a recognition of the traditional owners of the land where we meet and study and share ideas. We pray, from the Learning Design Special Interest Group, and on behalf of ASCILAT, I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend the respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining here as today or will be watching the recording in due course. So as a formal process, we introduce our Learning Design Special Interest Group in the beginning of every webinar, which we are part of ASCILAT. And we have 4 colleagues leading this, including myself, and 2 of them will be joining later or won't be able to join, but I have Kate Mitchell with me, who will be assisting today as well. This year, ASCILAT is at Adelaide between the 30th of November and 3rd of December. If you want to join our Learning Design Special Interest Group, where we do all different activities, here is the LinkedIn page. We don't have a team space anymore. So we do all activities, recording, everything is posted in this LinkedIn group that you can join. As I said, that this is a 4th webinar in the series. And the 5th one will be crafting the research proposal, which will be on 24th of October. So this one has already happened, and I think, yes, that's about it. Now we will have the next one, which is a dissemination channel. And today we have Hank Hoischer with us. Did I pronounce it correctly?
You did very well, Kashmira. Thank you.
I remember one of my students, I pronounced his name incorrectly all through the semester, and he didn't say anything.
No, no.
And then he said once, somebody else pronounced his name correctly, and I heard it and I said, oh my God. And then I apologized and said, don't worry about it. It's just my name and all of that. But
It's
anyway.
a tricky name. It's a Dutch name, so it's it's pronounced Hauser, but the sound is not easy to say if you're not from there. So yeah, but you did very well. Thank you.
So Hank does not require any introduction. He's a very established educator, but I just want to give some of his background in a peer-reviewed journal. So he is if you know AJET, which is a Q1 journal, he is editor of AJET, and he is also in editorial boards and committees in many other journals. Is it like Journal of Academic Development and few others? So I will let Hank share that with you, and over to you now, Hank. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kashmira, and thank you all for joining. It's nice to see you as well, Kate. I haven't seen you for a while. I'll do a quick acknowledgement as well. I'm on Turrbal and Yagara country in Meanjin, Brisbane. Meanjin is actually only just a part of the river, part of the banks of the river. which is right where the center is. But people starting to use MeEngine for the whole of the city, which is interesting. The River Maiwar, and so I pay respects to elders as well. It's interesting when you start talking about journals and knowledge dissemination, because there's very strict protocols around all of this. And on these lands, and elders have played a major role for thousands and thousands of years in protecting knowledge and safeguarding knowledge and curating knowledge, and so that's ongoing. So the reason why Kashmir has invited me is because I'm one of the co-lead editors of AJET, the Australasian Journal of Educational Technology. I spent quite a few years being an associate editor, and we've just done another round of recruiting some more associate editors as well. And then in the last couple of years, I've become a co-editor. It's a Q1 journal. It's also a community journal, which is really important distinction to make. It means that it's kind of owned by Escalite, and it's not for profit. So everyone who works on it, except for the copy editor, she gets paid a little bit, but everyone else doesn't get paid. So it's a volunteer journal. It's also open access, which is relatively unusual for a Q1 journal. And it doesn't charge any fees to get your papers published. Now that sounds like, in an educational context, that sounds perfectly reasonable. But there are many, many journals now that charge publication fees. And I did a paper with a number of people in the health faculty here a little while ago, and they could not believe that there are journals where you didn't have to pay, and they pay up to $4,000 for articles to get published. And it's to me that's like a crazy kind of business model. But anyway, I digress. So I have been associate editor for the International Journal for Academic Development for quite a few years as well, which is quite a nice. It's a nice journal. It's the journal that is connected to ISET, which is International Consortium for Educational Development. And HERTSA falls under that umbrella as well. So most of you will be familiar with HERTSA. So IJET is not it's part of Taylor and Francis. I'm not a particularly great fan of Taylor and Francis. We've had lots of issues with Taylor and Francis. It's hard to kind of get out of that though once you're part of it. It's very difficult to migrate a journal. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I've kind of led the migration of the Journal of Peer Learning because I was an associate editor for that journal. It's quite a small journal, also open access, and it's just been migrated to a new platform, which is still open access. But yeah, I think at the moment it's a Q3 or Q4 journal. So it's a small one. It's mostly focused on peer-assisted study schemes like PASS and yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit of a background as to why I'm here. So I will share a little bit of my knowledge in working for these journals. I said to Kashmira before, if I'm very happy to interrupt whatever I'm saying at any point in time, if you have any questions as we go along, because yeah, that will make it a bit easier. So yeah, feel free to interrupt. So when I'm talking about writing a successful journal manuscript article, these are kind of some general rules about the structure. The reason why I'm saying this, and I'll just go back for a sec, is because different journals have different potential formats for articles. So in AJET, the word limit is 8,000 words. So there's an expectation that articles submitted are between 5 and 8,000 words. If you do a review article, like a systematic review, literature review, you can go up to 10. You have no idea how many submissions we get that don't comply with any of this. Some articles go up to 15,000 words and I just go straight back, like we just don't take them. So yeah, it's important to read the guidelines around expectations of the journal, particularly because you get triaged, as we call it. So we get a lot of in AJET at the moment, we get almost 4 submissions per day, which is a lot. And so, there's a big workload around this. So if people don't comply with what we're saying they should comply with, it goes kind of straight into a bin of like, okay, can't handle this for now. So that's important to keep in mind. The other thing that I was going to say about the International Journal for Academic Development, we in that journal we have reflections on practice, which have a different format. So they're 1,500 words maximum, but they're kind of a different type of article altogether. So and different journals do different things like that. So it's important to kind of look at individual journals and what formats they like to see. There's the Journal for Teaching and Learning Practice in Higher Education. That has a whole lot of different types of articles as well that it will accept. So yeah, that's just a little bit to keep in mind before I start talking about this, which is a bit generalized in a sense. Kashmira.
Hank, we have a question in the chat. It says, does AJET publish critical reflection and discussion papers, or the article must be empirical?
No, the article does not have to be empirical. So the answer is yes, we do. But there are some pretty strict criteria around that. And the main criterion is what does it contribute to existing knowledge, and does it take the existing knowledge into directions that it hasn't gone in before? So in other words, what is it that you are contributing? Which is kind of the main value or added value of a conceptual paper or a reflective paper. So, and that's the same in IJET. I'm one of the editors in IJET that looks after reflections on practice, and we get a lot of reflections that are a bit along the lines of, we do this thing and it's really interesting and it's really good, and all the students love it, and that's kind of where it ends. And that's just not enough for a paper like that. Like, you have to be very clear on what is new about it, and where it pushes the boundaries a little. And actually, like, I'm looking at the word abstract. It's really good to be very upfront about that as well and very explicit about it, because that immediately draws attention to what it is that you're contributing. Okay, so most journals, abstracts are sometimes 200, sometimes 300, but generally around the 250 words. The abstracts are answering the so what thing, like what is your article about? What does it contribute? What problem does it address? So all of that needs to be very clear in the abstract. And I'll talk a little bit about abstracts in a moment. Then usually you have an introduction / background, which gives an overview of the context. It's very important, particularly because most journals are international. And so you need to kind of frame everything for an international audience. So if you do something in a very specific context, there's nothing wrong with that, but you do have to then demonstrate how it's potentially transferable to other contexts, or what elements of it people in other contexts could take away from it, if that makes sense. And again, be as explicit about that as you possibly can. Then there's a literature review, which is really important as well, because the literature review it shows, first of all, your knowledge of the field, but more importantly, it identifies where there's a gap, right? So it identifies what you're contributing. And I would suggest, like, at the end of a literature review, again, be very explicit where that gap is and what you're doing to address it. So if we go back a couple of steps to the question about conceptual papers, this is like an empirical paper structure, right? So if you do a conceptual paper, then everything from here on in becomes subheadings. So they're kind of themes of what you're talking about in your conceptual paper. So the literature review, so in a conceptual paper, you probably don't even need a literature review that is separate or that is called a literature review. You do an introduction, and then you can probably start with themed headings all the way through. A conceptual theoretical framework is often a good idea, but it can be woven into the literature review sometimes, depending on your topic and depending on what study it is that you're reporting on. The method section is probably one of the most important parts, I would suggest. If you're going to get an empirical study rejected as a paper, it's 8 out of 10 times it's because the methodology is not sound, or you haven't explained the methodology in enough detail. And this is all about the potential for others to replicate your study in another context. So again, it's like, think about you're part of a community and your study is showing others what they might be able to do in their context. So it's really, really important that you're very clear on how it is that you've conducted your study. Now, methodology is an overall kind of conceptual bit, and then methods are about the specific things that you did, like you did a survey, or you did interviews, or and the same goes for your analysis of your data. So then there's findings and results. Some people have a separate section for that, which is perfectly fine. Others combine it with a discussion section. It's a kind of individual judgment for you to make. Sometimes it's much easier to describe the results first and then have a discussion about the implications. Limitations, really important as well. Don't forget to include those. because it kind of frames what, where your conclusions come from and how they're limited about your particular context. And then you feature research and contribution to the field. So contribution to the field, you would probably repeat here, but it should, like I said, it's a good idea to put it in your abstract as well. And then you get to the references, which in most of these journals are in APA 7th. There's no excuses not to have your references in APA 7th and follow the examples, because, there's plenty of examples. You just follow where the commas go, where the italics go, all of that. All right, and then often there's a conflict of interest statement at the bottom. An acknowledgement where appropriate, where you got funding, if you did get funding, all of that. I will just pause for a moment. And the bird is a satin bower bird, a female. Beautiful bird. Has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but I just like to take photos of birds. Are there any questions at this stage?
I think we have one, but Kate said that can stay until the end. It is about the explain the quality and quartiles indicator of the journals. So what constitute Q1, Q2, those quartiles?
That's a good question. I'm not even sure if I can answer that, but I may be able to. Okay. Hang on, I'll go back a bit. So this we published last year, and Jason Lodge, who I mentioned before, he likes to make provocative statements and titles. So he decided we're going to write about how not to get published. And so, in other words, in this article, which is very useful, it's a kind of how-to guide, but it shows you what not to do under each of these headings. So these are the main reasons why papers get rejected by journals. The first one is no alignment with journal aims and scope. So for AJET, it very clearly states in the information for authors and in the information about the journal's aims and scope, that it is focused on tertiary education. So we get a lot of papers that are about primary schools, secondary schools, and they get straight rejected because they don't fit the scope. It's very straightforward and simple. So that is a clear example, but other examples are, there's nothing there about educational technology, for example, which is, some papers sound interesting, but, it is a journal about educational technology, so it does have to kind of at least hint at a link to that. Not all of them do. So the second bit there is about no contribution to the field. That's trickier, but it's but it is what I was talking about before. So be very explicit what it is that your paper contributes and how it adds to existing knowledge. Now, this can be incremental, like it doesn't have to, you don't have to, have reinvented the wheel. Like it can be very incremental, or it can be something that you've done that adds to knowledge about a particular context or about a particular cohort of students. And that's perfectly fine. So you don't, so as long as you're very clear about it. Lack of relevance to the international audience of the journal. That's I mentioned this earlier as well. So make sure that you write about your study in such a way that people in other countries around the world will be able to understand it. Some of that is about terminology. And so, if you use terminology, think to yourself, like, is this terminology used elsewhere, or is it something that we only use in Australia, for example? And if so, then you may need to explain it a little bit. Even within Australia, like this, we all know that different universities call things differently. So there's programs and courses and units and modules, and you have to be consistent in your use, but you also have to make sure that your audience and readership can actually understand what you're talking about in that sense. I've also talked about not enough detail about methodology and methods, so I won't go back there. Some methods are a little outdated. There's some studies that and technology acceptance models are a bit like that. Like there's been so much published about this. And then there's a lot of repetitive studies that do the same thing over and over again with a different, and they have the same results every time. So at some point, there's enough of that. And so it goes back to your literature review and your knowledge of the field and what is published. As a side bar there, it does really help if you're familiar with the actual journal as well and what's published in that journal. Now, I'm not saying that you necessarily have to have references that come from that journal, but it does help if you show that you're familiar with what has been published, particularly if it's directly related to your topic. And then the final one is incorrect reporting of results. In other words, that's about data analysis and incorrect reporting on it. So that's just basically about mistakes in data analysis and stuff like that. So these are the kind of key things to keep in mind if you and to double check basically before you submit. So this is about, we also last year wrote an editorial, and Linda Corrin led this, about abstracts and how to craft a good abstract. And abstracts are very important because they're the initial bit that editors read. And sometimes, based on the abstract, papers get rejected or straight away. So it's very important to kind of spend some time on writing a good abstract that has these kind of elements in it. Yeah, because a lot of people actually write the abstract at the end. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying, yeah, be careful that you don't write it as an afterthought. It's a very important part of your paper. Also because the abstract is ultimately what is going to get you noticed elsewhere as well once it is published. So it's really important to, to spend enough time on that. So these are the elements of a good abstract. Key aspects of the literature review, mainly like what is the research problem, what is the gap, clearly stated hypothesis, brief outline of the methods that you've used, and a brief overview of the results, or the headlines essentially, and then a little bit of implications, and that's the statement about why your study is important and how it contributes. Okay. So these are some elements of things that should not be included in a good abstract. Too much detail, too many words. And in the actual article, in this article, there's a table in there as well that that has explanations of different journals, different technology journals, educational technology journals, and the kind of guidelines that they provide. Some provide almost no guidelines. Others provide quite explicit guidelines around what should be in the abstract. And so, pay careful attention to that and just follow it, essentially. Journals are concerned with this because they're concerned with citations, because citations lead to rankings. Rankings lead to, and I don't know, in answer to your question, to the earlier question, I don't know actually where the threshold is before something becomes a Q1. But this relates directly to it. So keynotes, keywords, and abstracts are really important in terms of getting articles noticed, and then it also becomes part of citation indexes and the status of the overall journal. Now, whether you agree with this or not, and I have various problems with that whole system, but in the current context, if a journal loses its Q1 status, there are massive implications, because that means that people no longer want to submit to the journal, or far fewer people want to submit to the journal. And that then leads to a kind of snowball effect of, then it becomes really hard to get back up to Q1 status. And in the International Journal for Academic Development, I'll tell you a little story about this. We a few years ago, we had a special issue and we decided to do something innovative. So we called for vignettes. So we wanted people to, in 750 words, explain to us what academic development meant to them and what their ideas were around academic development. So so these were vignettes of 750 words, not articles, not reflections. Now, because we worked with Taylor and Francis, we got lots of really nice vignettes, but vignettes was not a category in the production system at Taylor and Francis. And so we then went through enormous difficulties to try and get these things published in a way that we wanted to get them published. So they're very valuable, but the delays that this caused meant that in that year, we lost, because we didn't publish as much as what we usually do because of the delays, we then lost our Q1 status and became Q2 journal for a couple of years. So we've had to work very hard to bring that back up, which we now are. But yeah, so this is important in the current context. And simply because in most universities, if you're in an academic position and you want to go and you want to apply for promotion, under research, universities will only recognize publications that are in Q1 journals. This was never the case before, but it is now. So yeah, sadly. All right, so a little bit about reviews. Getting a review that is really difficult, that is really harsh, that seemingly doesn't understand what you're trying to do, is really difficult. Like you get an emotional response, you know, when the email comes and you read, you feel like throwing your computer against the wall sometimes, and a whole lot of other things. So it's important to kind of, you know, look after yourself, take a bit of time to digest this, and don't look at it again for another week or so, is my advice usually. And then you go back and read in detail what the suggestions for improvements are. And 9 out of 10 times, they're actually quite valid. So once you get through your initial response, it actually helps to improve your paper most of the time. So it's a good thing. And it's a good thing if it's not rejected as well. So sometimes it's like major revisions, which means you've got to do a lot of work, which kind of sucks. But, you know, eventually you will get there. And so stick to it. Be polite in your response is another bit of advice, but not overly polite. You don't have to say thank you for every comment, but you do have to be polite and not defensive. So it's fine if you say, if you get a comment about your paper which you don't think is fair, or if you think the reviewer has missed the point, then point that out and say why you're not changing it. But don't say like, this person clearly doesn't know what they're talking about, because it goes back to them and you don't want them to get their backs up. You want them to just read it and say, okay, yes, they've engaged with my feedback and now I'm happy. That's the ideal scenario. Another thing to keep in mind, and this is a bit of self-interest as well, because we have trouble finding reviewers increasingly because people are busy. But if you can, do some reviewing yourself. It's a good way of keeping up with where current research is at, and it also gives you, it helps you in framing your own papers and dealing with reviews. And it gives you an opportunity not to do what reviewers do usually does to you. Okay, I think that's where I will leave it. I said I would only take half an hour, Kashmir. I mean, you should have stopped me because now I've almost taken up the whole hour.
No problem. I think you answered several of the questions that otherwise would have come, so that's fine. Yep. Yes, for reviewers. I find so hard, goodness. So yeah, be reviewer for agent or.
It was the main one. Thanks, Hank. It was terrific to hear your thoughts and answering my question as well. I noticed that Spice Wang had a question in the chat around suggestions for writing up academic papers when getting ethics clearance may be a problem. So I guess different. I mean, Spice, if you wanted to ask the question, feel free. I think the question is probably tied to, I guess, methodologies or theoretical frameworks that might be relevant. But if I've misunderstood that, please feel free to correct me.
Is that okay for me? Thank you, everyone, and Kate. I think you definitely interpret correctly. I think initially why I asked this question is because I know lots of us, academic developer or professionals, do lots of great jobs in innovation, and many of them are big scale across universities. And many of the projects work are based on research, and some of this stuff they are researchers previously before or had a PhD or this sort of thing, but found difficult or had challenges reporting what they have been doing for the institute. I wonder whether there's good examples or suggestions based on your experience observation for people like us to to write what we do, turn practice into paper? Yeah.
It's a good question, Spice, because it's not always easy to do all of this up front. Just because you're doing learning designer work, and then you kind of decide that it's really interesting, and so in retrospect you might want to write about it. It's then really difficult to get back to getting ethics approval for it. So the main piece of advice is probably to think about your daily practice and how you might evaluate that in the longer term, so that you can do an ethics application that precedes what you're actually going to do, because that makes the whole process a whole lot easier. Some years ago, when I first arrived at QUT, I was curriculum and learning designer at the time, and we were trying to get like an umbrella kind of ethics approval for everything we did, because ultimately every time you kind of work with an academic on a particular unit or course, the kind of process that you go through, and then if you evaluate that process, is quite similar over and over again. You do interviews with the academics, you do focus groups with the students, like it's the same kind of thing every time. And so we thought, if we get umbrella ethics for this, that we can just keep doing this every time and write papers about it as we go along. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. So we kept sort of getting knocked back on that. And so we basically, every time we want to do a study, we have to get ethics approval individually. The good news is that once you do one, then you can probably cut and paste a whole lot of it into the next one and change the details, so that will save you a bit of time. But yeah, retrospective ethics approval is very difficult to get, in my experience. Kate.
I guess I know that Kashmira and I have used autoethnography, which is really about personal reflections. I know that Tom Cochrane uses design-based research to kind of document the iterative process around a design, not necessarily the outcomes. And I guess I was just wondering what you think about those, whether they still require ethics or not. What's, I guess, their validity seen as in terms of from different journals? Because I'm just thinking about what are the easier routes, but what limitations would there be with those?
If you're one of the authors, and which you will be with an autoethnography, you probably don't need ethics approval. We have a lot of we actually have. It's an interesting question, because we've seen in IJET, in the Journal for Academic Development, we've seen a large increase in autoethnographies, which is quite fascinating to me. So we ended up doing a study about why that might be the case, and whether it was actually the case, because initially it just was a feeling, like, oh, we seem to be getting quite a lot of these. And it's actually a thing. So yeah, I'll let you know when that comes out. But I think it's related to our role, right? Because a lot of what we do, the interesting part is the process in which we do it. And so autoethnography is a perfectly valid methodology to report on that, in my view. Be a little bit careful which journals you go with. And like I said earlier, if you're a bit familiar with the journal, that helps, because then you can see if they do publish articles like that. Some journals are very focused on, and particularly Q1 journals, are very focused on large-scale large data set kind of papers. And so if there's nothing in there that you can see that does something else, then try and find one that does. So in IJET, for example, like I just said, right, like it's part of academic development as a discipline, I guess. But there's a lot of papers that are quite small scale, that are quite ethnography based, because they just kind of reflect on the process of doing academic development, which often involves, working one-on-one with small groups of people. And that's similar for learning designers. So, yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, that's been very helpful. Thank you. And also the chats. That's very helpful too.
Kashmir, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that it's if you are getting started with research, or if you don't have the data but you still have valuable experience to share, you can also try conferences, which we have covered in the previous one, where the standards of acceptance is a little loose, in a sense that they can be a little bit around peripheral ideas. So for example, one of the paper that was my paper was accepted in ASCII this year is around my experience as a migrant to becoming an academic, and I have kind of packed my experience into activity theory framework. So you can do things like that as well, which can help as well.
Yeah, for sure. We have, I mean, it's interesting because we have quite a lot of these discussions in AJET as with the lead editors as well as the associate editors, and Kashmir is one of them. Yeah, because there's a perception as well, and this is a difficulty sometimes. There's a perception that we will only accept large scale, large data set type studies, and that small qualitative studies are not going to be accepted. This is also this also becomes a problem if that perception is out there in the reviewing process, because reviewers think that they have to reject papers that don't have a whole lot of numbers. We're trying to work as hard as possible to kind of dispel this myth, because we're very much interested in qualitative studies as well as, big quantitative studies. There's nowhere that says that we won't accept qualitative studies. But again, I mean, it's the same kind of thing. Like there's more of a risk in a small qualitative study that it becomes too inward looking, in the sense that, what you're doing is basically what everyone is doing, and it's not adding anything new that is of potential interest to others. So you've got to make sure that you identify what you're adding to the knowledge pool, so to speak, and it's this, I mean, a good example of this was, the amount of COVID papers that we got, where everyone was basically describing what they were doing in response to COVID. But because everyone was doing that, after a while, you kind of get past the, what is new here. And that's important.
Yeah. I also want to add that, like, if you are using a tool, for example, one of the papers that Kate and I wrote around ePortfolio, and there are lots of ePortfolio papers, but using ePortfolio as a development journey is a different context altogether. That how, if you are doing your learning journey mapping, how you can use ePortfolio as a tool. So,
right.
And that is like completely, we did not need ethics or anything. It is just based on our knowledge, our literature, and we just contextualize that into with some examples.
Yeah, but what you just said was like a really good example of, an explicit statement of what you're adding to existing knowledge. Yeah.
I think we are about the time. So I noticed Leanne is here, which is one of the co-lead as well. So Leanne, you there? And
I think Leanne's a bit busy. Oh,
yeah, so if you want to just have some concluding.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Hank. I think this is a wonderful presentation, and given that it's part of our Australasian area, we've got a lot of interest in this, and should be very proud of the ranking that's gone up to Q1 ranking around this paper, and there's a lot of interest at the moment. And your presentation really opens up the explanation in terms of the quality and the caliber, and also saves us a lot of time as well. The question by Spice is a reoccurring one at the moment around the third space and research and who they should be collaborating with as well. I think collaboration is key in partnership. I think we have a really wonderful discipline where there's a lot of colleagues and collegiality around peer support in terms of helping each other in this space. And we really thank you, Hank, for your time today sharing this. And I'm sure, there'll be more papers coming through around this. And a lot of our colleagues here today are obviously involved in Ascolite, and we're looking towards the various activities that we have, and obviously later on in this year around this.
Thanks, Leanne. Thanks for inviting me as well.
Okay, so just to because then I don't get the emails, that the recording of this will be uploaded to the LinkedIn group in next few hours, and it will also be on Ascolite Learning Design, Ascolite channel, YouTube channel as well, where we have our Learning Design Special Interest Group playlist, so it will be there as well. Thank you.